Hey guys, welcome to Voice of Reason with Nathan. In today's episode, we're looking at the essential importance of boundaries, what they are, what they're not, and how you can set boundaries in your life. So to start off with, boundaries are really like a fence around a property, and they help us to enjoy the most out of that property. They give us that safety, that security. It helps us to have privacy. And I want you to imagine a property that doesn't have boundaries, that doesn't have this fence line around it. People would just walk through willy-nilly, knowingly or unknowingly. You know, some people would purposely walk through that property and do what they please. Other people would, unknowingly do that. And I would put forward that a lot of people in your life, especially if you're not good at setting boundaries, are unknowingly crossing your fences and walking onto your property, walking into your, personal space, or doing things unknowingly, and that can be causing a lot of frustration for you as well as for them as well. So it's important to understand this issue of boundary setting and how we can get so caught up in not doing it and then getting caught up in the feelings and blaming the other person and all sorts of things when it's really up to us. The onus is on us to set these boundaries, and I want to help to empower you to do that today. So to start off with, I just wanted to share some of the barriers of setting boundaries. Like most of us would appreciate, just like I shared from that example of having a fence line around your property, the importance of having boundaries. But what holds us back from doing it? And there are a number of things, and this is not an exhaustive list, but something I've come up with here and what I've experienced in counseling with a lot of clients, some of their barriers, like fear of conflict, not wanting to get into a conflict situation with a spouse or with a workplace manager, with a mate, or with, all sorts of different fears there about conflict. Another one is that boundaries are rude. That barrier of that you think you're being rude if you're setting a boundary. I can't say that. That's just rude. I can't tell my child that. And that's certainly not what a boundary is either. People might even be ignorant of their ability to set a boundary. They might not even know, and that's part of the importance of why I'm doing this video. Another one might be, they don't respect themselves enough to utilize their own internal power to do this, so they're not actually, they don't believe that they deserve a healthy boundary around themselves. It's kind of like, imagine you have a house and you don't put a fence around it because you feel like you're unworthy to have that house. You don't feel worthy enough to put a fence around it because it's kind of like I don't really deserve this, and I've just opened it up for everyone. And that is absolutely ludicrous, and unfortunately what a lot of people do when they don't respect themselves in the right way. And another example of what's another barrier for boundaries is people that have been abused, gone through trauma. And if that's happening right now with you and you're getting abused in a relationship, if you're going through any trauma right now, boundary setting may not be what you need. You might need professional help right now. And if that's happening to you right now, I'll put some links in the description, things that you can do to some resources that you can access to help you right now. And if you're in a situation like that, setting boundaries might actually aggravate the violence, might actually aggravate the situation. So just be really careful about that. In most cases, obviously, this is not the case, and I'm speaking to you. But if you're going through that right now, please access help, professional help right now, and get out of that situation. You do not deserve to be abused. It's not okay. So the other thing I wanted to just mention as well about boundaries is how not to set boundaries. So when we're trying to set a boundary, it's not again about being rude and just saying, you do this, you do that, and just blaming the other person. And it's so important in the process of setting boundaries, how we go about it. And I want to give you a 5-step process to do that. But the number one thing is to remember that it's not about labeling people. It's not about pointing your finger. Remember, I've done another video not too long ago where I talked about responsibility, and the opposite of responsibility is blame. And when we blame, we're pointing our finger, but we've got 3 pointing back at ourselves. So it's important to recognize that. So the number one thing with setting a healthy boundary, how we go about this, the 5-step process, number one is recognize the need that there is to set a boundary. And you'll recognize this because you're aware of your internal framework, your internal makeup. You know, what are your feelings? Are you feeling anger, resentful? Are you feeling betrayed? Are you feeling like people are walking all over you? You're a doormat for people. You know, you're just taking way too much work on, and people just throw things at you and expect you to do this and that, and you're not speaking up, and you recognize there's a need there to set a healthy boundary. Do not expect people to know what you want. Do not expect people to respect what you want. Do not expect people to read your mind. They can't, and they won't in most cases. Now, if you're in an intimate relationship, that can be on a different level where, yeah, you do start to finish each other's sentences. You do start to understand where you're coming from. That's different though. And even in those cases, there is a need for boundaries. Often in marriage counseling, where clients come to me with these issues, they haven't communicated their core needs. They haven't communicated what they really want for fear of upsetting their spouse, or you're feeling like they're not being heard or validated, whatever it might be. And that then starts to embroil in resentment and all sorts of conflict down the track. And even with children as well, setting healthy boundaries and following through. So recognize the need for a boundary. That's the number one thing. And you'll do that by looking internally. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's going on? And you need to do that. You need to follow that reflective process to identify the need there. Number two, define the boundary. So be super clear about what are your personal boundaries. You know, what do you want it to look like? And again, it's focusing on the behavior, not on the person. We're not labeling the person, but it starts with, first for yourself, what do you want? You know, what is your need here that's being crossed? What's happening for you, and what would you like to see happen? So that's so important to identify that. And again, it's the behavior, not the person, not labeling, not saying they're an idiot, they're this, they're that. That achieves nothing. You know, that's just going to upset them. It doesn't help the relationship. And look, all your labels might be true. Let's just imagine that, assume they're all true, which in 99.9% of cases, your vitriolic remarks about someone are not actually accurate. But anyway, let's just assume that they are true. It's not actually going to achieve the purpose of setting a healthy boundary anyway. So it's all wasted, you know, energy and emotions doing that sort of nonsense. So define the boundary. What's the behavior that you're finding troubling, and what would you like to see happen and change? And then it's about communicating that to the other person and putting that in place through that communication, finding the right time to do that, you know, being able to do it in a safe environment, being able to do it in a personal way where they're not being shamed. If you're saying, when you do this, you know, this is what happens, you always do this, you always do that, that doesn't achieve anything. Again, you know, doing it in a respectful manner is going to get the most out of that communication. Number 4 is about the consequences of the boundary. What's going to happen if that person does cross those boundaries again? And most cases they will, you know, unfortunately. You know, if say in the workplace someone keeps saying inappropriate jokes and you approach them and say, hey, you know, I'd really appreciate if you stop saying that those jokes. It makes me feel, you know, really offended, upset, annoyed. I find it inappropriate. I'd appreciate if you stop doing that. And let's say that they did do it again, most likely they will, even just unknowingly, they'll accidentally do that. That's where you can again approach them and say, look, I've already spoken to you about this. I appreciate that you stop doing it. If you don't, I'm going to have to, you know, speak with one of the managers. You know, and I know it comes across as cliche and a bit of a, you know, tittle tattle or whatever it's called, like a dibber dobber. But the honest truth is, if you don't do that, you're going to continue to have your boundary crossed. So it's important to recognize that reality there. And most people, if you set that boundary, say in a workplace scenario, most normal, rational people would respect that. You know, there are cases where people won't, and they'll be absolutely ridiculous, in their behavior. So it's important to recognize the consequences of your boundary and communicating that clearly. And then the final one there is about following through. So make sure you follow through so that when they do cross your boundary, then you can follow through on it straight away. Don't, you know, again, it's not about being reactive, but it's about responding to that when that situation happens, because again, it most likely will. even not knowingly. The person might just do it subconsciously or unconsciously, not unconsciously, but subconsciously. They might just, because it's a habit of behavior for them, and especially say in a spousal relationship, where say there's a certain form of communication that's going on and it's not okay, and it tends to escalate. Let's say, for example, it's not okay behavior, and it's important to remind the person of the boundary that you've set, and if they cross it, these are the consequences. So again, it's really about you taking this and making it work in your context, and everyone's context will be slightly different in some way or other, but these principles, this 5-step process to how to set boundaries, again, is going to help you to really do that. Again, that's recognize the need, define the boundary, communicate it, consequences of the boundary, and following through on that. That's so important. So there's a lot more to be said about this, but I just wanted to leave it there so you guys can really embrace this and go for it. Set those healthy boundaries in your life and get the most out of it. Hope this has blessed you. Take care.